As you all have probably already read or seen, today I'm going to be talking about Reborn, which is the first book in the Shadow Falls After Dark series. This episode will not contain spoilers, although I will be doing an episode in the future about the Shadow Falls series that will contain spoilers, but that won't be for a while, so let's get into it. So Reborn focuses on Della Zhang, who is heavily present as one of the main character's friends in the Shadow Falls series. Della Zhang is a vampire, and she has a lot of dark and emotional themes here at this book. She is very different than her friends. She feels a lot of shame about who she is as a supernatural. She feels a lot of shame about her familial relationship and dynamic there. And that's really why I like this book a lot, because it's so much more mature and adult than Shadow Falls. As a 20-something-year-old woman, it was kind of hard for me to relate to some of the themes present in Shadow Falls series, but in this series so far, I haven't read the other books yet. In this series, I would say that I do relate a lot to Della, just because of those themes that are present here. And with those themes, she begins to recognize the sexism in her life, and as a young adult, she begins to understand the misjustices, the injustices of what it's like to be a girl and a supernatural and somebody who wants to take on a typically male job. She wants to be an FRU agent, which in this universe, it's typically seen as a male protector thing to do, but Della wants to do that, and she is a vampire, and she is so heroic and angsty, and she has so much fire in her, and she begins to realize the sexism within that world, just because she wants to be an FRU agent. For instance, one of the camp leaders is an FRU agent. His name is Burnett, and he is often more worried or more hesitant to put Della on FRU cases than he would if it were any of the other boys that he usually puts on cases, and Della calls him out for it. Della does not care, she does not back down, and that's what I love about her. And the other camp leader, who is actually married to Burnett, her name is Holiday, she is part Fae, she actually backs up Della here, and I love that. I love that they're sticking together even though Holiday knows that she's going to be putting herself in an awkward situation because that's her husband. But Della doesn't hesitate to call it out. She doesn't hesitate to speak her truth about what she's feeling whenever she does deal with sexism in this series. I absolutely love that about her, and that's something that really wasn't brought up much in the Shadow Falls series, which I think is understandable because there was a lot going on in the Shadow Falls series that you couldn't really touch on here, but Della is just such a complex and intriguing character because her traumas have made her who she is, and explains a lot about her behavior now. Going into the same realm of her dealing with much darker elements, just in the first half, we see a murder, we see a death unrelated to the murder, we see dark and heavy emotions related to depression and anxiety, things that are mature and really adult here. And this is stuff that is unrelated to just being a teenager and growing up. But Della is dealing with all of this stuff on her own, and she makes me so sad. She just feels so alone, even though she has so many people around her, but she just doesn't. She's such a strong-willed, hard-headed character that she doesn't want to have people around her. And I can relate to that because I myself go through that a lot because of the way I was raised. And I just love that we're willing to have a character here that has flaws, knows she has flaws, is willing to admit that, but she finds it hard to accept it and deal with it. And I love that CC Hunter wrote that as part of Della's character, part of who she is. She is way more angsty than Kylie, and way more angsty than most of the characters in Shadow Falls. She honestly, I know she's a vampire, but she honestly reminds me of like a werewolf because of their usual angsty, moody tendencies, but Della is so potent in her emotions. She is really quick to anger, which is not always a good thing, but it's part of who she is, and I love that about her. Another thing we see in this series, obviously, is going to be an introduction of new characters. So, without giving any spoilers away, we have a new character introduced, and his name is Chase. He is another vampire. He is blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and he's not really Della's type. We're not, at least I'm not quite sure how I feel about him yet. I'm just not connected with him enough to want him and Della to be together as a romantic couple. We don't really learn much about him in this first book, and Della also is there with us. Della doesn't really feel a strong compulsion to be with him or a strong desire to be around him in any way or learn more about him. She doesn't really know much about him as well. So me and Della are kind of in the same boat, as in not really connected with him enough as a character to want him and Della to be anything more than what they are. But I will say that because we don't know about him right now, I am curious to see where this will go and where his character development will occur, because he's kind of just the same standard guy in this book. He doesn't really do much. He's not overly extreme. He's just another vampire that Della happens to come across. So, not much to know about him yet. Not much to feel about him yet. He's just kind of a bleh character. Another character that we see here, I can't remember. It has been a few months since I read the Shadow Falls series. I can't remember if he was in the Shadow Falls series, but he's definitely more present if he was. He's more present in this series now. His name is Kevin, and he was Chan's friend. And that's kind of how Kevin and Della come across each other, is their connection through Chan. I actually really like the friendship between him and Della, because he seems to understand her as a person similar to how Chan understood her. I really like Kevin, and if I'm shipping anyone with Della at this point, other than Steve, of course, I would ship him with Della, because Kevin is just such a nice guy, and he really, I don't want to give it away, but he really shows some compassion for Della, and I love that. But he's not overly pushy about anything romantic happening. He's just there for Della, and I love that. And he also, like Della, just speaks his mind. Like, he doesn't really care about hurting somebody, but he's not going to intentionally hurt somebody, if that makes sense. And my favorite part of this series so far is the new mythology that we get from this book. So, once again, no spoilers. There is a huge event that happens at the end of the first book here that completely changes how you view vampirism and the virus, and it really makes me love the vampire species more. So there is some new pieces of information that are revealed at the end of the book, and it makes the whole virus of vampirism a little more complex than we thought, and naturally this does bring about more questions from me, just because I do want to know more, but I'm 100% sure that they will be answered by CC Hunter in the upcoming books, because this is kind of a long series. I think it might actually be as long, if not longer, than the Shadow Falls series. So, with this new info, as a reader, I feel a lot of emotions. I feel curiosity, because I want to know more about this. I feel perplexed, because this is so odd. Like, I don't want to give spoilers away, but it is so different from the vampires that we see in a lot of other current contemporary vampire books, where they just bite other people, or they bite other vampires, or whatever. But this is so vastly different, and it honestly kind of takes I don't want to say vintage. It takes from other older types of vampires that I really liked. So I'm sure that is a completely subjective opinion to have. I'm sure some people, whenever they read this book, they don't like that part of the vampire lore, but I love it. I personally think it's really creative and flexible in the way CC Hunter wrote the history of the vampire virus and the complexities it can have. The way CC Hunter wrote that just makes me fall in love with the vampire species. And I think because of this book so far, at least, I think vampires are my favorite species of this world, at least. But with these emotions, I also feel really happy for what this means for Della, because Della discovering more about who she is as a person in her family and as a as a vampire of this specific subspecies of vampire, which we did not know existed before this. It just makes me really happy for her, because I feel like as a character with all these dark, deep, churning emotions, it seems that Della really needed something to look forward to in herself. She really needed something to prove that she wasn't a failure or something to be ashamed of. And I think this is what that means. Della discovering this huge piece of who she is, I think that really shows that she is just a good vampire. She is a good person. She doesn't have to be a monster. And this is really what she needs at this time in her life. And I think it's also a distraction for her from some of the other things that she doesn't really like to think about or talk about with her friends, even like her relationship with Steve or her relationship with her father. I think this will bring Della's focus more humbled, and she will be able to focus on herself more. And that's exactly what I think she needs. And this new piece of lore that is added to this series and this world adds even more mystery to the family history for the Sangs. So, and I guess Chase in a way too. So the whole premise of this first book, at least what I got from it as a reader, was that Della just wants to know more about her family, and she just wants to relate to somebody else in her family who is hopefully supernatural. It's not quite revealed yet by the end of the book where we're going with that, but this whole premise of the first book is Della just really wants family. She really wants blood biologically that she can relate to because of her vampirism and because of the virus. And to me, this piece of lore, this new discovery that she is a subspecies of vampire, really adds more to what this means for her family. And it only makes the mystery bigger. It doesn't really reveal that much about her family history. But once again, I think it's what she needs as a character. She needs something to focus on that's not outside of her. She needs to focus on herself to be able to begin that development that I want to see, where she's not ashamed of herself. She's not ashamed of who she is or where she comes from. And I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I just want to stress that I vastly prefer this type of vampire over any other contemporary takes, because I don't like the vampires that much that bite in order to get the virus or the venom or whatever it is, in order to transfer that to become a vampire. I really don't like that vampire, because usually what's associated with that is you have to live a completely different life and you can't blend in. I just don't like that. I like that in this series there's a lot more to it. It's a virus, and you can do blood transfusions, and you can still live as a human if you want to. You can blend in with the normal population, and you're not overtaken by some frenzy in your newborn days. I really like that. And I also like that it takes a while for the transformation to be complete. I think that's more realistic as far as supernatural species can go. And it reminds me of the book that Anne Rice wrote, Pandora. I really, really liked that book. If you haven't read that one, it's about a vampire named Pandora. It's kind of like a lost love situation there, but that's not really important to what we're talking about now. The way that Pandora gets turned is she has to drink blood from an existing vampire, and then the vampire that she drank from originally has to share blood. It's kind of like a blood transfusion going on, and that's how she changes. And that is basically what's happening here. And I absolutely love that type of vampire, just because it offers more flexibility in what they can do and how they live their life. And it's more thought-provoking as a reader, because not everything is spelled out for you. with the vampires that are bitten and then turned, it's kind of like, okay, they're turned and this is like the starting point or the end point of their human life and the starting point of their vampire life, and they're going to have to live completely differently, and they have these urges to kill people, and I just don't like that. I love that this one is more of a sickness that needs medical attention, but once you feel better, like you're a different species. I think that's better and more appealing as a reader. If, for instance, like you wanted to become a vampire, like I would vastly prefer to become this type of vampire. It just seems better and easier. And I think that's why I like this type of vampire better. And I think that the detail in which C.C. Hunter wrote this is just a credit to the author, because I really, really like that it was described how the blood transfusions work as a vampire, how the virus works, and obviously this is a vampire book because it's focusing on Della, so we're going to see a lot more, going to understand a lot more about vampirism as a virus, and it's a really good description of what it is, how it feels to become changed, and just how you're expected to live your life after. As I said before, it reminds me a lot of Pandora by Anne Rice, and I would highly recommend that because the mythology about the series is kind of similar. So if at any point you don't really understand what's happening with Della and how the blood transfusions work, I think it would be helpful if you wanted to go back to Pandora and read that a little bit. It is very interesting, and it's very similar. And I do wonder if C.C. Hunter got inspiration from Pandora. Just to give you a little background on this series while we're wrapping this up. This is the second series within the Shadow Falls universe. As I'm aware, this is still a part of the same universe, which is also another reason why I liked it. I love the effort that C.C. Hunter put into this, because as an audience, we're always wanting more. And usually what you get back from that from authors is like a spin-off or a almost fanfiction-esque type of short story. And I don't get me wrong, if I like a series and they come out with like a short story or one novella, like I'm gonna read that, obviously, but I still want more. I still want more and more and more. And that's kind of how I felt when I finished reading the Shadow Falls series. I did discover that there were, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 kind of mini books within that Shadow Falls series, and then I discovered that there was actually a whole other series within the universe, which is this, the After Dark series. And I just really love that C.C. Hunter put the effort into making this for us. I don't know if C.C. Hunter was intended to actually publish this stuff and write it as a full series, or if C.C. Hunter just wanted to write it for themselves. I don't know. But as an audience, we're always wanting more from a series, from a universe, and this was quality work. This wasn't just an afterthought or something just to get out of the way so they can be finished and wrap up the series for good. This was quality. This was exactly what I wanted. I mean, there's so much more about this. That's the thing, like, C.C. Hunter expanded even more into the universe. They didn't want to just close the series off. They didn't want to wrap it up in a tight little box and be done with it. They wanted us to think more about this, to read more, to want more. And that's what I absolutely love about this. The quality and the effort you can see is put into the work, and that's what's going to keep me reading. You can tell that it wasn't an afterthought. There was nothing lazy about this just to get it out of the way. I love that. It makes me think that C.C. Hunter really cares for the fandom here. And I am more likely to read something if I can tell that the author really cares about the fan base. And I would even say that this series, just the whole Shadow Falls universe, really is similar to the stories of the Marvel universe. I know that's a big statement to make, but I think it is akin to that because there are so many characters, so many elements and stories to get into, and with each story, with each background of a character, you're more provoked, you're more interested to see what happens. There's so much more you can go into detail here. With each character, there is a whole new potential for more series, more mythology, more lore, and I love that, and that's why I think it's very similar to the complexity of the Marvel Universe, because this universe is so complex. There are so many things to take into account here. We get to see the growth of other characters here too, which is awesome. I love seeing other characters that aren't the main characters of the book show some development. We see characters become more mature and looking forward to, what's going to happen next in their lives. We see characters develop into young adults and mature adults, and the topics of sex and explicit themes and depression and death are more explored in this book, which I love, and I'm not sure if that's just about Della as a character or if that's just where CC Hunter wanted the series to go as we see the characters grow and get older, but I love that is more present here, and it's easing into it. It's not really a sudden change in moods and emotion from Shadow Falls, but as I said, there is definitely a difference present here in the way that Della feels and talks about her emotions, her feelings, and about the dark things that are happening in her life. And I think that is really good, and it honestly carries the series, it carries the potential for more to occur here, just because as humans, we grow in life and we experience new things. There's always going to be something new and always going to be a first try to everything. And I really think that is such a smart decision to make, because even though as a reader you might have fell in love with the lovely teenage humor and childlike aspects of Shadow Falls, it is so much smarter to recognize that real humans develop and grow and mature. I think CC Hunter made the right decision in making this a darker series. And maybe that's why it's called After Dark. I'm not really sure. I've only read the first book, but I will be starting the next one. And I'm really looking forward to that. The next one is Eternal. So I'm sure I will be back within a month or so with a podcast episode about that. If you haven't read the Shadow Falls series, I highly recommend it, especially because I will be doing a Shadow Falls episode that will contain spoilers in the future.